Okay, let's go. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If you're new, welcome. Everyone else, what's up? How are you? How is everyone feeling? How have things been going in your world? I don't know about anyone else, but this week I just continued to consume myself with building a fence. If you've been around, you know I've been talking about building a fence, and I'm about 80% done. Gotta say, I'm pretty impressed with myself on the job I did. It's a really solid, good fence. And starting from the experience level and knowledge base I was starting from, I'm pretty impressed. I did a good job, and it's been great. I was out there like 7 hours yesterday. I got in, I literally passed out at like 9:30 p.m. I haven't gone to bed that early in like years. And it's amazing how if you just exhaust yourself physically, you fall asleep very easy. And so I didn't do these intros last night like I normally would because I just pooped myself out completely. But I'm up today and feeling pretty good. I just got a little bit more to do on it. But it's just been a fantastic outlet. I've been building a fence instead of worrying about whether or not my kids are going to have to wear masks in school in a couple of weeks, or whether or not these plans I'm starting to make to travel are going again to be dashed. Y'all know there's looming shit, isn't there? Looming shit. So I've been distracting myself from that with just like physical activity, and it's been good. It's been good for my psyche, but it's all still looming. So what are you going to do? Take it as it comes, I suppose. And just keep holding it down. I imagine I'm not the only one who's just holding it down. And I've talked about this before. I don't know you who's listening to this right now would remember this, but it's always something I remember from my musician days. I spent a little time as a bass player in some bands in my early 20s, and there would be these times when you're playing with your band and the drummer, he's not holding the time so good. You know, maybe he had a little bit too much drink. Maybe he's just like not on it that day. Maybe he just didn't have a very good drummer in your band. But the drummer would not be holding the time very well. And so as the bass player, your job would be to just like tap your foot a little bit harder and keep it down for the rest of the band, to just hold it down until we get through this bout, you know? And that's what I feel like I've been doing, holding it down. Teaching some classes each week, just trying to keep my wits about me, connecting wherever I can. In these conversations on the podcast, and my personal conversations with my immediate friends, and my weekly teachers call, wherever I can find places to feel like some kind of coming together with people. And I had my very first person show up for in-person class last week. Someone I'd never met before who just happened to find me online and saw that she lived near. And it's the first time I ever had someone come in person. And it was awesome. It was great. It was great to have a totally new person to practice with. And I had all my live stream folks around the world there too. It was a hybrid class, which, you know, there's something to talk about this. People keep talking about the word hybrid class. I don't know. We gotta be more specific about what we really mean when we say that. But that's another conversation. What I enjoyed was that in the past, when I was doing online classes before the pandemic, and someone came into a class that I was also live streaming, there was sometimes a little bit of weirdness about it. You know, people were like, oh, am I on camera? Are people looking at my butt? And soon people would see, oh, look, everybody who's doing it live, their butt's in the air too. And nobody would really care. Like, it usually was fine in the end, but there would always be a little bit of apprehension. And in my studio in Allentown, we had some extra lighting, but it was very like low key. When you walked in the room, it didn't feel like you were in like a photo studio or something, or like a video production. But my new studio is smaller, and I use some light stands. Like I have to use some lighting to make it look okay on camera. And so when you walk in, it feels like a little bit more like a production. But I think maybe because we've been in the pandemic and people are just used to the fact that teachers have had to do online classes, it didn't faze her at all. It didn't seem weird that there was a little bit of production going on as well. But in fact, I was able to introduce her to the people who were online, and they were able to meet her, and it was all cool. And I really liked that feeling of, okay, maybe life can return back to some idea of normalcy, at least normalcy in the sense that we're allowed to be together. But as I said, there's a lot still looming, and I'm being cautiously optimistic. One thing that is most certainly continuing to provide me some joy is doing this show, getting to connect with people on a regular basis. Absolutely enriches my life, and today's conversation with Eve Grzybowski is no exception. As you'll hear, I talk with her about it at the very beginning. Eve is someone who I feel like I've kind of known for many, many years, but I never have met her until this conversation. And she's also someone who's doing some wonderful and radical things in her retirement, both, I think, on a yoga level and just on a personal daily life level. So it was a wonderful thing that I finally had this opportunity to speak with her. I was greatly inspired by the conversation, and I feel very confident that you will too. I'm so overjoyed that you're going to get to hear it today. Before we get to it, though, I do want to take a quick moment to express some gratitude to a few of our longtime supporters. People like Nick Hay and Hannah Glancy, who've been podcast premium subscribers for a while now. They've been showing their support for some time, and I am so grateful to people like Nick and Hannah for doing that, because it really has enabled me, and I'm so enriched by doing this show. I'm hoping that people who listen to it are. And if you're someone who has been listening and you want to have access to the full archives or just be a supporter, becoming a podcast premium subscriber is the way to do that. It's a choose your rate, and you can cancel at any time. If you don't have any money, then you just email us and we'll give you a free account. But if you are able to give something, it really is a huge help, and we are very grateful. So if you want to find out about becoming a podcast premium subscriber, along with all of my other stuff, my live stream classes and teachers call, and all the other things that I do, everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all, I think that's about fine. I will touch base with you on the other side. I've got a little bit of like some parenting woes. So my fellow parents, you might stick around to the other side. I'd like to hear what you think. But for now, let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Eve Grzybowski. Can you hear me?
I can. Yes, I can hear you.
I think we have succeeded. Eve. Hi.
Hi, Jay.
Do you like the video on? I tend to turn my video off and just listen, but if you like the video on, you can keep it on. Which do you prefer? For me,
let's try it on.
Okay, because for me, the video, I'm going to turn mine off. You'll still be able to see me, I think. But I find it like it takes some of my energy if that's on. If I'm on there,
yes.
Like to just listen to you is a little bit better for me. But if you want to keep the video on, that's okay. I can do that.
Okay, I'm going to try it without, because I don't usually do that, and then this will be a new experience.
You know when I think of it, like the old days when we just had phone calls.
Yeah, I still do that actually.
So it'll just be like that.
I'm turning my video off.
Me too.
And
see you later.
bye.
But we're still here. We didn't even go anywhere.
Isn't that amazing?
I know. See, to me now, I just hear your voice. I'm not thinking about the video, or I like it better without the video. But if you want to turn it on, you can let me know. You can turn yours on. I can turn it on for you at any time.
That's great. That's good to know that.
And I want to let you know, I am already recording. Okay.
Oh, okay. Good.
And it's so fun to get a chance to speak with you. I don't think we've ever met in person before, have we?
No, never.
See, but I feel like I sort of know you because your name has been in my life for a long time. I remember you from the blogosphere days in 2008 or whatever. I had a blog too, so I sort of paid attention and your name was there.
That's amazing because we were early adopters, weren't we?
I think so. And then I also feel like your name's popped up at one time or another, like maybe you've listened to the show or you've supported or something. I've just seen your name. And then I saw your article in The Guardian about this awesome radical retirement plan you came up with. And I just thought, Eve, like it's almost like your name has recurred in my life for a long time. And this is the first time I'm actually speaking to you, which I find very fun.
I know, because I'm coming to you from Australia.
You've been there for a long time though, yeah?
I've lived in Australia for 45 years.
I see. But you weren't born in Australia?
No. Can you tell from my accent? A lot of people here can recognize an American accent. I was born in Chicago.
I see. I wouldn't have assumed, but yeah, I could kind of hear you didn't have the typical Aussie accent.
Yes. And when my husband and I went camping a few years ago, we met lots of campers along the way, and they assumed that I'd just gotten off the plane because my accent was strong compared to, an Australian accent. Mm-hmm. And it kind of hurt my feelings because I'd lived here for so long. I thought I must be accepted completely, but then it pointed out a perspective, so like people relate to you according to what they hear and where you're from originally. And then I would tell them, oh, I'm from Mitchells Island, New South Wales, Australia. And then they'd say, no, where are you really from?
Well, I guess you can take the girl out of Chicago, but you can't take all the Chicago out of the girl, huh?
That's right. And all of my relatives are back in the States. And that's really sad now because we would have gone back to visit over the last couple of years, except for COVID. And Australia has very strict policies about flying in and out.
Yes, I'm very well aware of that because I had plans to go there in 2020 that got canceled, and I've got lots of friends there, and I haven't been able to go for the same reasons because it seems like it's not really plausible.
Yes, well, I hope we both get to cross the ocean soon.
Yeah, at some point. But Eve, you have been, I don't know, like in yoga, I think I saw you write that like yoga is the longest relationship you've ever had. And it stems pretty far back. I saw somewhere that you like did a teacher training in the early 90s or like some prototype training in the early 90s. Is that right?
I taught my first, as you say, prototype in 1989. It was just completely audacious. I didn't have any training in how to teach other teachers, but I felt like there was this passion for yoga, and that was the best way to teach because all those people that I taught would go out and teach other people.
Now, in 1989, there was no such thing as a 200-hour training yet, though. So you didn't have it. How did you I mean, did you have any kind of models for what you were doing, like from your teachers or any other sort of examples of people doing teacher trainings that you were going off of?
Well, I had done an Iyengar teacher training in 1979-80.
I see.
So I sort of emulated that, but then added years before. So really flying by the seat of my pants.
I see. So you weren't teaching like a strict Iyengar method, even though you had been trained in it?
No. And probably that wasn't, legal according to BKS Iyengar, but nobody was very legal in those days.
I was what I'm saying, because in the 70s and 80s, it was all such a raw territory,
Yeah, the good thing was that in a way you were educating the public about what yoga was, but then there were so many people that had no idea. And so you were kind of a stranger in a strange land in those days teaching yoga. And I still am. I'm still teaching a couple of classes in what I call the yoga shed on Mitchells Island. And I got to move from the city, from Sydney, 11 years ago. And when I moved up to this part of the world, it was starting all over again because nobody knew me here. Yoga was still relatively unknown. And locals here didn't use the internet, and I didn't know how to connect with anybody. But it's all changed. And it's because of those 200-hour trainings and 350-hour trainings. People, want to become yoga teachers. And I support that, but I still don't know if that's the best way to do it.
Oh, well, I mean, you opened up a whole can of worms there. I mean, I would first be curious to hear. I read somewhere that you owned yoga. You had owned and founded and directed 2 yoga schools. So when did that happen? Did that happen before you moved to the new place or where you were previously?
Yeah, you've done your homework, haven't you?
I try to do a little bit.
No, that's what makes you a good interviewer. In 1985, I don't know, I had this bug for a long time, which was about bringing communities together. And I think it was because in some ways, in the way that I grew up and I had my formative years, I didn't have a community. So then yoga gave me the opportunity really to draw people together. And I started up my first school in 1985. And that was a very popular school, and we spread the word. And then...
and was that the Sydney Yoga Center? Was that in Sydney?
Yes. And what a great name. I mean, like, nobody had that name at that time. So,
see, that's the thing. If you lived in a place and you called it that yoga center and there was no other yoga centers, you got in at the bottom floor. You were there first.
Exactly. Well, like I was saying, it was all bottom floor.
Yeah. But also what I would be curious about, because I've talked to a bunch of people on this show about this time, because it was sort of the beginning, the precursor to when it really even started. And for a long time, there weren't yoga centers. There was like people in their living rooms or church basements or whatever. It wasn't people like opening up shops. So I'm curious, did you have, like, how does the idea come into your mind? I mean, I know you said you wanted to start community, but like opening up a place and just like putting a sign out front, there weren't a lot of examples for that.
No, but I don't know. It's a passion. And I think when you get involved with teaching yoga, when you do your own practice for a long time, there's a step that's next, and it's kind of driving you forward. You don't know exactly what it is, and you don't know whether you can do it. And then you realize on the other side of it, once I started up my yoga school, that it wasn't I wasn't going to fall in a great big crevasse and fail at it. I stepped over it, and it was like looking back and wondering, oh, that wasn't such a big step. And then it had its own momentum after that, because yoga is yoga. It's attractive. It is good for people, and people feel better. And so the school grew and grew.
It's so interesting. Just last night, I had a conversation with these teachers. I have this weekly teachers call with these teachers from around the world. And the conversation we were having was specifically, why do people decide they feel like this passion to teach? Because there's other things, like someone described how they like to swim a lot, but they've never felt like, oh, I have to teach people how to swim. But for some reason, there's something about yoga that it does seem at some point when like the practice takes hold in you to some degree, and like the tools work for you, and there's those transformations that happen, it becomes some natural impulse or extension to share that with other people.
Yeah, I think even though you don't know everything about yoga as a beginner, you kind of intuit that it's a vast pathway or topic, and that there are things to discover. It's kind of mysterious. I mean, when I started, I was just interested in the physical aspect of it. And now, from my perspective, as a 76-year-old, I look back and I think, oh my God, not that it was so shallow, but that was just a tiny portion of what's available through the yoga path.
Well, I'm very intrigued by that. That's a conversation I've been having on the show recently, actually, quite a bit, about the sort of mystery that yoga represents, or what I like to sometimes call mystical realm, which is sort of taboo to talk about sometimes these days, because the people who talk about it are the cult leaders or something. And the people who have a personal experience of it don't talk about it because they don't want people to think they're crazy or something.
Yes, I heard you in your conversation with Brian Cooper.
I see.
And he was a bit cagey, wasn't he?
I liked it. He was just he's like, it's personal. And, it made me think, I talked about it in the intro about how, like, when I spoke to someone from a Native American Indian tribe, they sort of said the same thing. There's certain things we don't talk about unless it's the right context or something, like to protect it. But for me, what I'm interested in is, what I'm curious about, and you just said it, is that, and I think there's an episode that I recorded with Sally Kempton that will be heard before this one, actually, where we talk about this some, where like yoga is about opening up your subtle body. And you hear about subtle bodies, but you don't always hear a lot about what that actually means. And when you just said that, it felt like that to me. You said, oh yeah, it used to be about the physicalities, but as I look back now, I can see there's this mystery to it. There's this phenomena of life that's quite magical, and yoga has a play in that.
And can I ask you then, that puts me in the position of the interviewer, but I'm curious.
Please ask all your questions. You're allowed to ask me everything you want.
Have you had these experiences of the mystical? I haven't. I have to be honest, but I feel like I'm moving in that direction. Maybe I'm just a slow learner, and maybe it's helped that I haven't been as interested in developing, perfect yoga poses or that extremely physical practice. So there's kind of like a quietening down process that happens as you get older. That's a good thing.
I think so. I mean, I turned 49 last month, and I've made steps in this process of slowing down as I've gotten older, because it feels like it's necessary for my well-being. But to your question about mystical experiences, I would say I have had some mystical experiences. One of them was like a deathbed experience. Other experiences have just been in the context of deep practice. I've had some like things that I've seen and experiences that I've had that, I've observed them through my own experience, and I haven't always acknowledged them or talked about them because it's not like important necessarily, but it is an aspect of yoga practice that I think has been almost lost or something, like the teachers who would teach about this are no longer around. And there's so many other influences on yoga now. I'm just sort of curious about to talk to people and hear what they really think and what they really believe about yoga. And what I would say lastly about it is when I have talked to people, it seems like a lot of times people do have these experiences. They just don't identify them as such.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Well, I guess what I would ask you about is, you said that you did this training in Iyengar method, but that you didn't stick to that as you moved on as a teacher. And I know you wrote a book called Teach Yourself Yoga in 1997. And
correct.
I'm intrigued by that because I'm also part of that mystical experience thing we were just talking about, has to do with the idea that each person can have a sense of knowing from within themselves. And the idea that you could teach yourself yoga kind of implies that there's an inner teacher. And I'm curious what your feeling or your thought is about that.
That's a really interesting combination of ideas that you put together there. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I've had a drive to encourage students who come to me to do their own practice. And it seems like one of the hardest things to teach. You can teach people the techniques of, these wonderful tools that we have, doing the asanas, doing meditation, teaching them how to relax. But to encourage people to do their own practice, their home practice, it's just been so hard for me to do. And so I've been in writing that book, trying to get it out there as a tool that people can have at home. It's got yoga practices in it and hints about practicing. And then in, I think 2013, I developed with a student friend of mine, packets of yoga cards. So these were really beautifully designed packs of 10 where you could take these cards traveling with you. You could take them to the park to be able to do yoga outside. And I don't know, I still hear from people. It gladdens my heart when I know that somebody has taken up, in whatever small way, doing personal practice. And that's a good thing, a good part of some of the yoga streams. Mm-hmm. So Ashtanga yoga is a way of encouraging people with self-practice. Iyengar yoga, maybe to some extent. But yeah. I left the Iyengar fold in 1990 because I felt like it was a wonderful way to learn how to do asana practice, but I wasn't filling my heart. And so I just started looking around. And I ended up finding some lovely women teachers, Judith Hansen-Lassiter, Donna Farhi. But, yoga isn't everything. Well, you know that. And I launched into some other workshops. There's a workshop that has come out of the United States called Love, Intimacy, and Sexuality. And I got involved with doing those workshops for a number of years just because I felt like somehow I needed to create more relationship with myself and with other people. And they were great workshops they were like laboratories of doing exactly that. And I think that's something that people have to know, like yoga isn't an insurance policy that you're going to develop in all ways, and sometimes you just have to open up your intuition to everything else that's out there. But I never stopped practicing, like that was, as you described in the beginning, my long relationship. And it's still there, and I'll probably have it forever.
That is so very interesting, Eve. First, the idea, like you said, about self-practice. I couldn't agree more. Ashtanga was my into that because it was like a set sequence that you could just learn and do on your own. That is how I got to having a personal practice. And I do think it's an interesting and important distinction. Like when you do practice by yourself at home, it's different than when you go to a group yoga class. And then to hear you talk about how what was missing from your practice after your Iyengar method time, and I had some time there too, was that you felt like it didn't fill your heart, as you said. And then you went and found workshops in intimacy. And I ended up going to Desikachar teaching because I felt like the breath it was more about intimacy. It was about being intimate with myself and kind and stuff. And it's just a very interesting progression to me that you looked to fill the forms with relationship, essentially, sounds like.
Yes. And maybe that couldn't have happened if I hadn't a firm yoga practice for so many years, because that is one of the benefits I think that we experience is that being quiet, doing home practice, learning in that way makes you listen to, sometimes it's called that small voice within, your intuition. And then you kind of know out of that what directions to go and what directions not to go.
See, you just went to the mystical realm, Eve. For me, when you said you listen to the small voice within your intuition and it tells you which way to go. And yes, you could be wrong because it's your intuition and it's not like a scientific study. But I do think through practice, I've developed more sensitivity and awareness to that one particular voice, which does feel like a voice of truth or like a guiding light or something. And that's where you verge into something beyond in my mind, because it's mystical. It's not in your muscles and your bones, in your consciousness or something.
Yes.
I like that. Like you're like, okay, yes. Well, what I also would say is that is what I meant when I pulled all those ideas together in the initial question to you about your book, Teach Yourself Yoga. That is what I meant. That I do think that ultimately a person's yoga is about what you said, that you can develop a skill set of practice that enables you to get quiet inside so you can hear and perceive more clearly. And that from that clearer place of perception, you make choices that feel more in line or harmonious or fulfilling or something.
Yeah, that's wonderful when that happens. How long does that take?
Who knows? Well, that's
like I said,
what were you going to say?
I'm a slow learner.
Well, I don't know. You sound like you know what you're talking about to me, but I also think that there's something also very interesting about what you're saying, because you're not wanting to put yourself forward as the one or something. You know what I mean? You're staying very humble in it. And I think that's a wise place to be. because it is when people talk about mystical realms that you get into places that are sometimes unhealthy or something. We've all seen what's happened over the years.
And Jay, it's a really wonderful thing not to know. Like I listen to your words and I weigh your words, and you have a lot of experience in yoga too. But I'm weighing your words.
Yeah.
I don't know if what you said is true. It's true for you. I'm still trying to find out what's true for me.
As it should be. Weigh all the words. And I like what you said. Sometimes I have too many words, words to a fault sometimes. So I appreciate that. But it also is something like coming to podcasting from blogging. See, we both share blogging together, and I would write 900 words, and you could never get to the same kind of nuance like you can in an hour and a half conversation or something. But I want to talk about that time, because you talked about having your book, and then there was this blog time, and I've talked about it on the show before, and it was a very exciting time for people who were doing that writing. What do you remember when you first heard, do blogs, or when it started for you, the blogging?
I remember it so well. We talked in the beginning of this conversation about my living situation. So it's very unusual for people in their 60s and 70s to decide that they want to live together as adults. That's something that you do as university students, and usually have terrible experiences out of it.
And we should mention everyone listening that is the radical retirement plan that I referred to earlier. You moving in with your friends. And we can get to that some too, but carry on with what you were going to say.
So I live in a beautiful house in a rural setting with two other couples, so my husband and I and two other couples. And when we hatched this, at that time, it seemed like a radical idea. Now it just seems like the way we live. Some friends of ours who are documentary makers decided that they would film the early steps of us launching this plan. So we had filmmakers following us around for about a year and a half. And the woman partner of the two suggested that I start blogging about my experience. And I didn't know what a blog was. I wasn't really technically oriented. I'm still not. And that was 2006. And so I looked up what blogging was. That's what you do. I Googled blogging. And I found out that there was a man in Iraq who was a blogger, and he was definitely an early adopter. And he was getting out messages about what was actually going on there. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. I wonder if I could do that. And so I started, my husband set me up with a blog site. And my first blogs were so tentative because I realized this was something that was going to get launched into the world.
The World Wide Web, the WWW.
Exactly. And I would just be naked in front of everybody. And so I just would post photos. And they were photos of the house that the six of us were living in. And gradually, little by little, I would add text to what I'd photographed. And then, it's not very long before you realize that nobody's noticing necessarily what you're writing.
Not that many people there. The World Wide Web seems kind of small.
That's right. Yeah. So you can start saying things that you wouldn't say otherwise.
Yeah.
So that was my beginning, and I haven't stopped since then.
And you did start you did start blogging about yoga because I remember reading yoga stuff, didn't I?
Yeah. So eventually it wasn't just about our 6 people living together. It was about yoga. And then it was about my process of growing with yoga. And especially after I moved out of Sydney in 2009, I felt like I'd left my community behind. I didn't have that face-to-face contact with these beautiful people that, we'd cultivated each other over decades. And it was my lifeline, it kept me in touch with those people and vice versa. And I was able to write, and draw out of an experience of what's that like when you go live your dream? What happens if it doesn't turn out exactly like you expected? What happens when you realize you're still stuck with yourself? And that's all interwoven with yoga practice.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.